Brandon Miller's life revolved around his children. 3 years ago, he buried the love of his life, Emily, after a tragic car accident left him widowed and overwhelmed. Since then, every ounce of energy he had went into raising 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Max in their small rented bungalow on the edge of town. The house wasn't much. It creaked in the wind, had chipped paint, and a leaky faucet that Brandon always meant to fix. But it was warm, filled with laughter, drawings on the fridge, and the smell of pancakes on Saturday mornings. Brandon worked long hours at a local auto shop, earning just enough to cover rent, food, and the occasional surprise visit to the dollar store for crayons and action figures. His daily routine was ironclad: wake before dawn, prepare breakfast, drop the kids off at daycare and school, then put in 8 or more hours under the hood of someone else's car. In the evenings, he became chef, homework helper, storyteller, and comforter-in-chief. Despite the exhaustion, he never missed bedtime stories, even if it meant reading the same dinosaur book 5 nights in a row. On one particular evening, a dry wind swept through town, rustling the brittle leaves in the front yard, and setting Brandon slightly on edge. He'd noticed the flickering hallway light again, probably another faulty wire in a house full of outdated wiring, but he pushed the thought aside. There was no money for an electrician. After bathing the kids and tucking them into bed, Lily with her stuffed unicorn and Max with a threadbare dinosaur blanket, Brandon collapsed on the sofa with an unpaid electricity bill in his lap and a cold cup of coffee beside him. He tried to focus, but his eyelids grew heavy. Somewhere between calculating late fees and mentally planning tomorrow's lunchboxes, he drifted into sleep. Outside, the wind picked up. Sparks danced unnoticed from a worn power cable that snaked around the back of the house. Within minutes, a faint glowing ember landed in the dry mulch beneath the laundry room window. The flame was small at first, like a whisper in the night, but it quickly found fuel in the brittle wood and aged insulation. Smoke began to slither under the door frames and curl along the ceilings like silent snakes. The old smoke detector in the hallway didn't make a sound. It had failed without Brandon knowing. The children slept soundly, unaware of the creeping danger inching closer. All remained quiet for now. But deep in Brandon's subconscious, something stirred. A father's instinct, perhaps. In just a short while, everything he cherished would be put to the ultimate test. The shrill scream of his 4-year-old son jolted Brandon out of sleep like a lightning bolt to the chest. Max's voice pierced through the thick, unnatural darkness that now filled the house. Brandon sprang up from the couch, immediately coughing as acrid smoke clawed at his throat and stung his eyes. Panic surged through him, but instinct took control. The living room was already hazy, the once familiar walls now shadows wrapped in smoke. Heat pressed against his skin, and the distant crackle of fire confirmed his worst fear. Something was burning, fast. "Max!" he called out, stumbling toward the hallway. He could barely see through the swirling black air, but he knew every step of this house by heart. Reaching Max's room first, he threw the door open and found his son standing in his crib, tears streaking his suit-covered face. Without thinking, Brandon scooped him into his arms, wrapping a blanket around the boy as he shielded him from the growing heat. Then came a crash from the kitchen. The fire was moving faster than he imagined. "Lily!" he shouted, turning and barreling down the hallway with Max clinging tightly to his chest. The flames were visible now, flickering down the ceiling like angry orange fingers licking at the walls. Reaching Lily's room, Brandon kicked the door open, the knob too hot to touch. She was curled up in a ball under the covers, sobbing, her little face red with terror. "Daddy!" she cried as he rushed to her. He dropped to his knees, placed Max gently on the floor beside him, and pulled Lily into his arms. The smoke was thicker now, choking, and the fire roared behind them like a beast finally awake. He grabbed the large comforter off her bed and wrapped both children inside it as best he could, pressing their faces into his chest to shield them from the smoke. The hallway was nearly impassable when he turned back. Flames licked along the ceiling, and the air was shimmering with heat. Gritting his teeth, Brandon lowered his head and sprinted toward the front door, cradling both children in his arms. A beam from the ceiling crashed behind him, barely missing his back. The front door loomed ahead, just a few more steps. With one final burst of adrenaline, he kicked it open with all his strength, the door flying off its hinges as smoke billowed out behind them. They tumbled onto the front lawn as fresh air hit their lungs like a blessing. Neighbors were already outside, their faces lit with fear and disbelief. Someone screamed. Sirens wailed in the distance. Brandon collapsed to his knees, still holding his children tightly, shaking, coughing, and sobbing. Lily whimpered against his neck, and Max began to cry. But they were alive. He had made it. Behind them, flames devoured the house they once called home. But they had escaped with what mattered most: each other. By morning, the charred remains of Brandon's home stood like a blackened skeleton against the pale dawn sky, smoldering and lifeless. He sat on the curb wrapped in a donated Red Cross blanket, watching smoke curl into the air, his arms protectively around Lily and Max, who clung to him in exhausted silence. Firefighters had done their best, but the house was gone. Nothing but ashes, melted memories, and collapsed walls. His hands were scraped and blistered, his face smeared with soot, but he barely noticed the pain. What haunted him wasn't the loss of the home, it was the what-ifs. What if he hadn't woken in time? What if Max hadn't screamed? What if the hallway had collapsed just a second earlier? But as he looked down at his children, now sleeping on his lap despite the chaos, he knew the only thing that mattered had been saved. The neighbors had rallied quickly, bringing water, clothes, and warm meals. A woman from across the street handed him a bag of baby wipes, applesauce pouches, and a few coloring books. "It's not much, but," she said, and Brandon's eyes filled with tears. A local pastor offered them a temporary place to sleep at the church's family shelter, and without hesitation, Brandon accepted. That night, lying on a cot with both children beside him, he stared at the ceiling in the darkness, his mind replaying the fire in loops. Max's cry, Lily's terrified eyes, the hallway engulfed in flames. Sleep came in short, restless bursts, each time waking in fear that the fire was back. The next morning, a local reporter showed up outside the church. News had spread quickly in their small town. Single dad rescues children from house fire. The headline ran on the local news site, accompanied by a photo of Brandon kneeling on the lawn, clutching his kids as smoke poured from the house behind them. The story went viral overnight, and suddenly, strangers were calling him a hero. Donations began to arrive. Gift cards, care packages, even a letter from a firefighter's widow offering her late husband's old recliner for their future home. A GoFundMe campaign was started by his coworker at the auto shop. Within days, it had raised thousands. Brandon was overwhelmed by the generosity. But for all the attention, all he wanted was something stable, something quiet, something safe. He missed the photo albums, Emily's favorite coffee mug, Lily's kindergarten painting that once hung proudly on the fridge. The loss was real and deep. But every time Lily whispered, "Thank you for saving us, Daddy," or Max reached out in his sleep to touch his arm, Brandon felt the flicker of hope inside him. They had lost everything, but they were still a family. And slowly, from the ashes, a new beginning was starting to take shape. 3 weeks after the fire, Brandon stood on the porch of a modest, but freshly painted mobile home nestled on a quiet lot just outside town. A home he never imagined he could afford, thanks to the overwhelming kindness of strangers, friends, and even people from other states who had seen his story online. The GoFundMe campaign had surpassed 40,000. Every donation, from $5 to $500, carried messages of hope and gratitude. Some from single parents like him, others from people who had lost loved ones to fires and found healing in his story. The pastor had helped him find the rental through a church connection, and his boss at the auto shop had surprised him with a promotion to assistant manager, citing Brandon's leadership under pressure. Slowly, the pieces of his life had begun to reassemble. The kids adjusted better than he expected. Lily had made a new house, drawing for her class and proudly told her teacher that her daddy was a superhero. Max had nightmares at first, waking in the middle of the night crying about smoke, but Brandon was always there, wrapping him in strong arms and whispering, "You're safe now, buddy. Daddy's got you." Their new home wasn't big, but it was filled with warmth and light, fresh paint, second-hand furniture gifted by kind strangers, and the smell of grilled cheese and tomato soup most nights. Brandon framed Lily's drawing and hung it by the front door, beside a picture of Emily that miraculously had been scanned and saved digitally by her sister years ago. One Saturday, while unpacking the last box in their living room, Brandon found a letter someone had slipped into a donation bag. It read, "You didn't just save your children from fire. You showed the rest of us what real love and courage look like." He folded the note gently, tucked it into his wallet, and sat for a long time, watching his kids play with donated blocks on the floor. For the first time in what felt like years, peace settled over him. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. He had been tested by fire, quite literally, and had emerged not just as a survivor, but as something stronger. Protector, a builder of new beginnings. That night, Brandon sat on the small back porch, sipping tea and watching the stars blink to life in the sky. Lily came out and curled up beside him. "Do you think Mommy saw us when the fire happened?" she asked softly. Brandon looked up at the stars, his throat tightening.
"Yeah, baby,"
he whispered. "I think she saw everything, and I think she's proud of all of us." Lily smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Max sleepily toddled out after her, dragging his dinosaur blanket. Brandon gathered them both close. The fire had taken their house, but it couldn't take their love, their resilience, or their future. From the ashes they had risen, together.